Welcome to Latter-day Saint Ideas. I'm Andrew Knopf. I'm joined today with Jerry Grover. Really excited to have him on the show today. I'm going to give you a little background on him. He's a licensed professional structural and civil engineer and a licensed professional geologist. He has an undergraduate degree in geological engineering from BYU and a master's degree in civil engineering from the University of Utah. He speaks Italian and Chinese and has worked as a freelance translator for the past 25 years. He has provided geotechnical and civil engineering design for many private and public works projects. He took a 12-year hiatus from the sciences and served as a Utah County Commissioner from 1995 to 2007. He is currently employed as a site engineer for the remediation and redevelopment of the 1,750-acre Geneva Steel site in Vineyard, Utah, which is just down the street from where I live.
Come visit.
Most of our viewers have probably seen you on some other podcasts. One of the things you're most famous for, obviously, is your translation of the Characters document. And I'm really excited to ask you some questions that I haven't heard you asked in some of these other podcasts, and then you can we'll have you present the part that you want to. So for those of you who don't know, the Characters document was in the possession of the community of Christ for, I guess, 120 years. Originally was thought to be Martin Harris's Anthon transcript, but it turns out that's not true. It was copied by, it's in John Whitmer's handwriting, correct? And nobody had translated this. Everybody was like, well, that's interesting. It's some characters, and we don't really know, if that's legit, but there it is. But Brother Grover, tell me about how you first got interested in doing something about this, because I mean, it was so long and nobody had done hardly anything. So tell us how you got the idea to do this and to finally crack the code.
Well, first I went off my medication, Who would try such a crazy thing anyway?
That's right.
But actually, I did a book on ZIF and the metallurgy of the plates. So I calculated, I determined the thickness of the plates based on some experimentation of them rustling and that kind of thing. And then, so it's kind of detailed explanation of how the plates were created, depletion gilding, and why the engravings were black and all that. So I had kind of a complete look at the plates. And so I knew the number of plates, a range, right? And so then one of the questions was, okay, can the Book of Mormon actually fit on that number of plates? And of course, you have to look at character density or like word density, right? Meaning the original language. So the Characters document, okay, that's probably the best example we have of the glyphs. I mean, at least probably it looks like it's maybe the same dimensions as the plates, close. And anyway, so I looked at it and was like, well, the first thing popped, and I've always been kind of just interested in ancient number systems of all sorts, just kind of fascinating and how they change through time, that kind of thing. But anyway, I just looked at it. I was like, oh, well, there's a Mesoamerican number 9, bar.9 right there, and pretty close to it. Well, there was a shell glyph, which is a month glyph in Maya and Mesoamerica, and that's often 20 because they have 20-day months for their calendar round. And then there was a 4 in Egyptian next to it with a dot above it, which is curious. And then there was another obvious 5 and 10 in Egyptian. So I said, oh, there's number sets here, right? And then there was actually an Egyptologist looked at this, and I'll get into that in the presentation, had also noticed number sets way back in the 50s. So I thought, oh, maybe I can get some dates. So I just started out trying to figure out, okay, maybe I can get some dates out of here, maybe something. But it ended up being, as I looked, it was like, well, most of it's hieratic or demotic, pretty close. And so with some Mesoamerican elements. And anyway, so I just translated using standard Egyptian resources, and
wow, you make it sound so easy.
I'm not saying it was easy. It wasn't.
Okay.
It wasn't necessarily easy, but it was like once I figured out a few things, it wasn't as difficult as. Obviously, very few people had even looked at it because there was some obvious erratic. But again, it's time consuming to look through all these thousands of glyphs, find out which matches, and it was an effort, but I'm not saying I was the only one in the world that could have done it or something. And maybe I was the only one that tried.
Well, I appreciate your humility. I still think it's an awesome feat. How many hours do you think it took you as you poured through all of these different, I guess you had hieratic and demotic, Egyptian, and then monumental Egyptian that you were coming through, as well as the Mayan, to try to match these up? Like, how many hours and years did it take to finally match these things?
It just took me about 4 months.
Really?
Yeah, I did it like every day in the evening, and then I kind of didn't sleep too much, and so basically till 1 or 2 in the morning, and it was very monotonous, but just looking through everything.
Hmm.
But once I started figuring it out, it wasn't as hard because I kind of could predict certain things that made my search limited my search what I needed to look for.
Wow, 4 months. That's still incredible.
Yeah, and
I
then to
think.
write the book took me, longer because I had to
Sure,
document
sure.
everything, and
Yeah, yeah.
it's all, I had it peer reviewed, right? That kind of thing. So, and
Was there a moment when it started coming together where you started finding a lot of hits and where you went,
well, the
"Oh my
number system,
gosh."
once I figured the number system out, what it was doing, then I got all the dates and numbers. And then the other major breakthrough, that's the main thing we're going to talk about today, is around the number sets, there were kind of systematic glyphs, right? And like, what are those things? Why are they there? What are they doing? I mean, obviously, these are dates, years, and I kind of figured out birth, the death date of King Benjamin and some other things. But then I was just looking at it one day. I was like, I like the distance number glyph. I go, I know I've seen this somewhere. Where have I seen this glyph? It came to me that is embedded in the Maya glyph for the calendrical markers, which some people call it came to pass glyphs, that kind of thing. So
Mhm.
yeah, so then I thought, oh, I know what it's doing. It's using and the dates were kind of not like in order or something like you would think. So anyway, it was basically using the Mesoamerican date structure system in the document. That
Okay.
helped,
Yeah.
right. So I can like, oh, so I can see which order things are in, events.
Mhm.
And I figured out pretty quick. This wasn't like some part of the Book of Mormon we have. I mean, that was pretty obvious. And, because there were a series of dates, which they don't have that. And honestly, I didn't expect it because it basically said, as we'll get into, that Joseph Smith copied the characters early on. So it was probably 116 pages stuff where he was copying characters and translating
Sure.
some of them. Right.
No, I think it's exciting. I remember thinking, I don't remember how young I was, but I remember seeing a copy of the characters document and going, "What does that say?" And I don't. You probably remember the edition of the Book of Mormon they did. I think it was the '70s that had the gold cover, and they
Yeah, I've
used
got
the
one of those.
characters. Yeah, and
Yeah.
you're like, "What does it say?" And I thought, we're never gonna know. We're gonna have to wait till the millennium to know what it really says. And when I found out that you translated, I was super excited. I was like, "Oh yeah, we don't have to wait."
And
Yeah,
honestly, I didn't do it for money. I don't sell my book. I mean, you can buy. I have a few copies. I mean, I'm out of these books, but all my books are for free. You can just download them off the internet. So
can
yeah.
you hear us,
So that was
Dave?
that was kind of how I got into it and translated.
Hmm.
And then I did one book, then I did an update because there were some things I found since. And then I've actually used it. One of the proofs of the accuracy of it, in my opinion, is it solved chronological problems. So I wrote a book, Chronology and Calendars, the Book of Mormon, recently came out with that. So I'm just saying that I do know that number one, there's no way the numbers could actually not be correct and have them actually add up to the correct dates and everything like that. So it's just statistically impossible. I'm not. I think it is substantially correct.
Well, again, all this stuff's in your book, and have you even had anybody try to debate the academic merits of any of it?
But no, I haven't really had any. I mean, it's been out there. I've had on academia.edu, sent it out to 3,000 people. I've had hundreds of thousands of downloads from professors overseas. I don't know what they have to say. That's the fun thing. Since it's free, anybody can look at it. Anybody.
Yeah,
So it can easily be just looked at, and all the sources are online, and it's not really much conjecture on my part. It's just kind of out there to see. So okay,
all
so
right.
we ready to go?
Yep, we're ready.
Okay, this is a cover of the book. You can kind of see the characters document. I've done some interesting color stuff to it, but we'll talk about that. Um, a little bit we've already kind of discussed. This is the characters document. One thing is, if you look on the very right side of it, you'll notice it looks like a little washed out, and there's little few pieces missing.
Yeah.
That was one of the things that there is actually another version of the characters document, a portion of it. And as we, this is just the translation itself. So
Right.
I'm not going to read it here, but you just need to know that there is actually differentiation between the first four lines and the second four lines, and you can kind of see that in the way it's written, and then there's some macro stuff that's different.
So maybe when they copied it, there was a natural break there as well when they copied it over.
Yeah, it's a different port. It's not even from the same section. The first section looks to be probably the first part of the preface of the Book of Mosiah. The second part is I call it basically a summary of the prophetic calendar.
Okay.
Events on the prophetic calendar, partially. It's basically from Samuel the Lamanite on. I suspect that was part of the preface to the Book of Mormon, but it's also possible that it could have come off the small plates, the additional material. Basically it said that only translate up to Benjamin, and then there may have been additional writing on the small plates we don't have.
Okay.
So anyway, kind of basic. In winter of 1827, Joseph Smith said he copied characters off the plate. So presumably that was, and the other thing is, even if it's John Whitmer's handwriting, because there's another version, another set that was later, the presumption is, and it's an article by an individual in the church history department, kind of supposes that there was another draft, or that they copied this off of another sheet, maybe Joseph Smith,
Joseph's handwriting in that,
or
maybe.
Oliver or somebody, right? So yeah, so the handwriting analysis showed John Whitmer. It's clearly not the Anthon transcript. Has a Mexican zodiac on it. The description was different.
Mm-hmm.
So, and we kind of know what happened to that anyway. It was stolen by the son-in-law of Martin Harris at the request of his wife, and promised that he could marry his daughter, or her daughter, if he did it. And so then she had a copy of it, actually, she produced sometimes. Anyway.
Yeah, that's from Don Bradley, some of Don Bradley's research, right?
I don't know if Don really
else?
published. Yeah, it's in 116 pages, but that was available a little bit before him. So
okay.
Yeah. So here's this broadside I'm talking about that was in a newspaper in New York. It's basically the top three lines, the top, portions of the top three lines down to a certain point. And then the critical thing here is there actually, there are a few characters on the very right side that are kind of washed out of the characters document.
But you found them here, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so anyway, so I had to make sure I included those glyphs in the translation, right, to be complete. And then I actually have in my book, there's a whole table at the end comparing each glyph, because these are actually, I think these were worse, not copied as well. There was one that was transposed. So if there's any difference, I always go to the characters documents to be more accurate. I think it was earlier copied too. This may have been a copy of a copy of a copy. Who knows?
Sure. And was this back then? They used to have to do like wood cuts to print pictures, right?
So there may have been, a lot of things, but so the other thing too is, one thing that's interesting is we don't really know how the chapters were identified in the Book of Mormon. There wasn't, a word chapter that was written in later. There was something that indicated a break. So scouts thought maybe it's some symbol or something, but I actually think you see the way the first line on the right-hand side flags down.
Yeah, that's the extra one kind of at the bottom. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that may be the way they designated the breaks. So it was still part of the text. They just did that little thing. So they weren't writing, they may not even have a big space or anything, because plates were compact. So that may be an easy way to do that.
Yeah. Without having to leave a line or
right. Exactly.
Waste any space. Yeah. So it's kind of like a return without moving to the next line.
Yep. So anyway, so that kind of gives you, so I get a more complete, and then I do assign, I assign numbers to those, so we know what they are, each of those glyphs. And then I just use, for the characters glyphs, I just use the numbers. This was Ariel Crowley, assign numbers to them. I just use his number designations when I'm referring to a glyph. And then when I did the translation, there was certain assumptions, because of the orientation of the title, we can assume the copy glyphs were oriented on the original plates, same fashion. the glyphs reading from right to left is indicated by Joseph Smith, running the same as all Hebrew writing in general. One of the things there is we know, I mean, there is indication that the plates were covered and that kind of thing. Well, it's pretty clear he was copying it. He did understand and copy individual glyphs. That's the only way he could know that it ran from right to left.
Right. And also when he talks about the title page being on a specific leaf of the book,
Right.
implies
Exactly.
that he's reading the leaves of the book.
Yeah. At least initially, right? So
There were real characters. They were really on plates. Those plates were used. And I think that's important to note.
yeah. Then kind of looking at the script in general before attempting a translation, it's like, okay, what is this? Is it alphabetical? I mean, I presume it's Egyptian, but let's say if it's alphabetical, it really couldn't be. There's too many glyphs for it to be some alphabet, right? If you look at the number of unique glyphs, it's not syllabic either. It looks to be a logographic language, which Egyptian is. So, and basically, this wasn't an attempt to, get down to every little detail and past participle or anything if there were any, right? I'm just trying to get the main meaning out of it. Um, and because I suspect that was, some of that may have disappeared. It may have been, you understood it in context, which I added, when I translated, I kind of added the context. So, anyway, so then as far as the resources I used, basically I preferred where I had it, Palestinian hieratic, which is hieratic from Palestine. They used it. And then I just used kind of your standard Mueller's is the hieratic. That's basically how you determine what hieratic glyph is what. And we'll talk about it in a minute. And then the Chicago Demotic Dictionary, they include or refer to the Demotic Dictionary by Erickson. And then I use Faulkner-based Egyptian dictionaries. He's kind of the main person that developed a dictionary, but his isn't very searchable. It's still in handwritten and everything. So people have taken that and formed, made dictionary, use that to make the dictionaries that are searchable and easier, more easily searched.
And most of these came out in the late 1800s. You said after the Rosetta Stone?
Well,
Or
long
are they more
after that.
recent than that?
Yeah, Mueller, like early 1900s. Chicago Demotic Dictionary, they're adding to it all the time. It's electronic.
Okay.
Yeah, they've done that since. Erickson, I can't remember, the 50s maybe. Faulkner
Okay.
the same. Faulkner the same. I
So
think.
safe to say there weren't any dictionaries like this in the 1800s for Joseph Smith to have referred to or David Whitmer to have copied from.
Yeah, I don't think so. And like, I don't
Okay.
even get into all that. What did Joseph Smith know and not know? I'm like,
Sure. No, I just think it's interesting
Yeah.
to know if all of these dictionaries were, if there was somebody around, some of them around or not. It doesn't sound like they were till much later.
Yeah. So basically, as we get into, so you have hieratic and demotic. I'll explain what those are. Demotic, they were both around at the time Lehi left. So, and kind of just to help as I'm discussing it, you're going to see these terms. So for demotic translation, for the most part, it's either right out of the. I don't know if they can see my cursor. Can you see a cursor?
Yeah, I can see the cursor.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. So this is kind of out of the Chicago Demotic Dictionary. This would be out of, it refers to this EG, which is Erickson's glossar. So it's another one. So I just cut and pasted there. So when you see these types of cut and paste, I'm just cutting and pasting directly from the source material, the academic source material.
Right.
So anyone can see what I'm seeing. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I'm very transparent and
You're not making up and redefining things with lots of dots and ellipses between explanations.
yeah, or if the form is a little different, you can see it. So
Sure.
I'm showing it to you. So I'm not.
Yeah.
So essentially, what you do when you're and also the demotic dictionaries, they kind of already have the definitions there. I don't have to do any. You find the demotic glyph, and then you can go to the Chicago or others, and it kind of just shows you you can look up the meaning of that word. Whereas in hieratic, you first have to figure out, because almost all the Egyptian dictionaries are in the monument, they're using the monumental glyphs for a word. So you have to figure out what the hieratic is, and then Mueller tells you basically the glyph it is in the monumental form, And so let's talk about that briefly. Is the monumental form is what's found on your temples, your
It's
Egyptian
like
temples.
big
Yep.
pictures,
Right.
monumental size images. Yeah.
Yeah. And if you look on here on two down here, I've got this D3. That's a whip. So that is a monumental form. And then they assign, there's a fellow Egyptologist named Gardner who wrote the main grammar book early on. And he gave them designations D, ABCs, and the numbers. And they basically broke them up by parts of humans, animals, insects, kind of differentiate them that way. It's not like meaning differentiated. It's kind of the type of glyph it is.
Okay.
And so you actually have to figure out what the hieratic is. And there's a table that tells you what monumental form that hieratic matches. And then you go to the dictionaries and try to figure out, and some words may have 5 glyphs, some maybe 2. The other thing that's happening in the characters document is there actually some combination of glyphs to save space, which that's what he said. He said it was a more compact language. The other
Yeah,
thing
you were saying that if whichever is the shorter version, Mormon picks.
looks like, yeah. So
Yeah.
it's going to demotic. Again, I'm just guessing. I only have a limited numbers. If I had the whole book, I wish I had the plates. It would have made it easier.
Yeah. Sure.
So,
Yeah.
but the other thing that's happening too is in Egyptian, a lot of times they will short. I mean, there's a full word like the word for Nephi is Nefer, which means beautiful, right? In Egyptian, that's kind of the etymological derivation of at least one form of Nephi.
Is there also a goodly one?
Same. It's the same good, beautiful kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's only,
yeah.
but in Egyptian, it's NFR, but so they actually had more than one glyph, but they just dropped because when it's used in context, because it's kind of a shorthand in a way. They drop the other glyphs and just use that main glyph, and you can read it in context. So sometimes you actually have a word that may be more than one glyph, but they actually just use the first glyph.
Okay.
And that's kind of what I'm seeing happening also in the and that's why I actually had to use some different dictionaries, because a Budge is a dictionary people don't use that much because it has some issues with the phonetics, but he actually does have a more complete list of a word form that sometimes is only one glyph, that maybe you found it on some papyri or some monument or something. So anyway, and then here at the bottom, you can kind of shows you what you're looking at in the a standard out of a dictionary, a standard, has the monumental. So it has the monumental glyph. It shows D3 at the end. It gives you a definition of it. And it also has the pronunciation of the word. Okay. So again, this is all just standard translation stuff. I'm not doing anything weird.
Sure. So let me just make sure I understand. So you're saying you would go from the demotic, and then you'd look it up in the monumental. You'd find the monumental equivalent, which would then tell you what the word meant.
Yes. Well, the demotic was a little easier because I didn't have to go to the monumental, because the demotic dictionaries often just have it right there. They
has a definition. Okay, it was the hieratic.
Yeah, they've kind of jumped that. So
the hieratic, you had to go to the monumental, and then
the Chicago. That was the beauty of the Chicago online. When I had to deal with demotic, in some ways it was. I mean, it wasn't easy because they have to go to the source, because they say, okay, you have to go to this EG 146 to see what the actual glyph form looks like. So I kind of had to. There was a little bit still work, but then the hieratic, you just identify, okay, this matches this hieratic glyph. What does the table show that is in the monumental form? And then now they've got the monumental form, and then I go to the monumental form dictionaries to look it up.
Did you have any of those moments where you were looking, I guess, digitally, and then sometimes physically on the paper copies, where you went, that's Benjamin? Like where it hits you that's the name?
No, it's not so much with the names. Well, yeah, there was a few, like Land of Jerusalem. That was kind of, but that's an issue too, is you had to, for the names, that's a whole different presentation I've given, is they're metonymic in the Book of Mormon. So they're not phonetic really, what I was seeing. They're mostly the meaning of it. So you had to figure out what is the meaning of the name. So we have the Book of Mormon on a Masticon. Other people have kind of worked on that. Like one that was kind of tricky was layman. because nobody really had a good meaning for it. And so I kind of found some things, but it was like, I don't have a really, I actually had a pretty good Mesoamerican representation of it, but not so good in the Egyptian. And then actually, um, somebody came out with a paper, or actually I found it. I wasn't even aware of it. It was like at a conference that where he actually showed that layman means unbeliever in um, Hebrew. So then I find the glyph for unbeliever in Egyptian. It matched perfectly in Heretic. So does that make sense? So
Yeah, sure.
so so
Yeah.
so, so the names, you're not just like looking at, oh, that's Benjamin. It's like, okay, yeah. What I have to find is what the meaning of the name is, because that's the way it's written in Egyptian.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily phonetically Hebrew. It's Egyptian meaning. The underlying meaning is written in Egyptian meaning. So that the names are actually trickier in a weird way.
Sure. Yeah. I remember listening to one of your other presentations where you're talking about figuring out that Mormon's name was the sign for the Jubilee year. And he was born potentially in the Jubilee year. And so that all made sense when that all came together. That was the
Yeah, well, see,
glyph for him.
Mormon was actually an interesting one because um, I actually find it in Mesoamerica quite a bit, and it could match the name with that. So it was actually a Mesoamerican match, and the Egyptian, I have the form, but not the phonetics. So it's not an Egyptian phonetic word. It's actually a Mesoamerican phonetics, weirdly enough. So
Oh, wow.
yeah, so that's what I'm saying. So it was actually is what you'd expect. This is a language that sat 1,000 years in Mesoamerica, so you're going to have some influence on it. I don't. It may have been more of a mnemonic language at the end, where it's not so phonetic, but it's just a glyph means something, and you can actually. It's kind of like Japanese can read some Chinese characters, right? Even though their language is different, because it has the same meaning, but not necessarily the same phonetics, is it?
Sure. Yeah.
I don't know if that makes sense. Again, we're kind
Sure.
of way into the weeds, and I'm not sure I'll get through much here if we
No, it's
keep
good.
talking.
All
So I
right. Keep
better
going.
keep going.
All right.
Okay, so what I found and what we're going to talk about today is the calendrical markers. So I actually found all the number sets. They had these markers around them, which were curious. Some seem to have numeric kind of form. Um, and here you can see the blue sets were the numbers and numerical dates. Not every number is a date. Some of them are actually counting, actually have a number meaning in the text. Like 20,000. 20,000 was part of where it basically said 20,000 of the children of Mosiah went over the mountains to the foreign speaking people of Mulek. Okay. So, but it had a 20,000 there. So not every number is a date. And then you have, um, and we'll kind of get into it. You have different things in the Maya date markers. You have an introductory glyph that tells you a date's coming. They don't really know everything, where it came from exactly. I kind of can show some of them. It's also in the Epa Olmec, so the Maya have it, the Epa Olmec have it. And then you have these, so these initial series discs, glyphs. You have a distance number glyph, and we'll talk a little bit about that. You have posterior date indicator glyphs and anterior date indicator glyphs and period ending glyphs. So these are all things that the Maya use in their date counts. The other thing I figured out is the number system is actually uh, it's based on the sacred numbers. They preferentially use the sacred numbers of the Hebrew and Mesoamerica. So it's actually a very unique system from a numeric notation standpoint. It clearly is Mesoamerican also because they use a leading 5 and 10 and 15, which Maya does in its spoken. They have a form that uses that, so it's kind of unique. Yeah, if you're really, very much into LDS, it's also, the 5 and 10 are sacred numbers in Egyptian hieratic. That's a square and a compass. So,
Okay.
and one's a line. So there's other.
There is that what's shown the third line down there?
Mhm. Yeah, third. And
Okay.
so, yeah, so you have the 5 and the 10. So this shows you the number. The 9 is interesting. Again, it had different forms, but that particular form is 24, and that's the 24 plates. So it's actually, they're using some of the numbers as rebuses. So it kind of looks like plates. So
What's a rebus?
It's like, those little puzzles where you had a picture of an eye in English, just like,
Oh,
uh,
okay. A picture to say the word.
yeah. So you have an eye
Okay.
plus, a picture
Okay.
of
Okay.
something else and you figure
Okay.
out the word. Does that
Okay.
make
Okay.
sense?
Yeah.
You've
Yeah. Now
probably
I
done them
get
as
you.
a kid.
Sure. Yes. I don't think they told me it was called a rebus, but I did do it as a kid. Yes.
Right. So the numbers are meaning actually something.
Yeah.
So anyway,
Very
these are
cool.
the numbers that are in there. You can see how they all add up. That's the other thing is it's cumulative additive, which matches the Egyptian and Hebrew, meaning you add up all the numbers, kind of like Roman numerals a little bit. They're not
Sure. It
they're
doesn't
not
look like.
places.
Yeah. It doesn't look like they and I don't know. You don't want to get off on this too much, but it doesn't look like it's always going from largest to smallest, though. It looks like they're smallest sometimes first, and then medium
Well,
size, and
for the most part, it is, except where you have the 5 and the 10. That's what
okay.
I'm
The
saying.
5 and the 10 break a
That's
little.
why
Okay.
they're out of place because they're leading. They're using them as a leading. This is numeric notation science we're talking about here. So,
Okay.
but
Yes, because they're going right to left. That's the 5 and 10 are on the right, and then you're going left to the other numbers.
yeah, so you're actually bigger to smaller usually, but in this
Yeah.
situation, they throw the 15 doesn't follow that numeric notation.
Okay.
And the reason they're doing
Probably
it,
because of the sacred number. Is
I
that
think,
the reason?
well, yeah, they're all kind of sacred numbers, but yeah, there's something super sacred about those.
Yeah.
If you kind of, that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So again,
Cool.
that's a whole nother different discussion. I've done a bunch of podcasts on this one. So usually what happens, I give a podcast and then people go to sleep at the host and they don't want to get to the other one. So okay, so let's get to the calendrical markers. I just kind of told you the numbers. So meaning there's symbols around the sets of numbers that are telling us something. So as I mentioned, you got to remember it had been embedded in Mesoamerica for 1,000 years, and so there may have been some influence both ways on the way they did their date counts. So it's actually in an interesting way, kind of the only ones that count this way or similar way, or even in the sequence, is the Sumerians, which is kind of the Jaredite origin theory. So there
That's
may
your
be some,
Swords of Shul book, right?
yeah. But
Yeah.
anyway, so there may be explanation there, but as to why they also used it, they didn't think it was so pagan. It maybe been found in the Brother Jared text or whatever.
Jaredite plates. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, we don't know that those are plates, actually. That's another thing. They're just
All right.
a
Jaredite
record.
engravings. All right.
Yeah. I mean, the ether ones we do, that 24 plates are plates.
Sure.
It says they are,
Yeah.
okay. Like I said, it doesn't really match Egyptian construction, but it's very close to the Mesoamerican structure of counting time. However, they are using Egyptian and glyphs, and even I can see some Hebrew phonetics even going through. When I find a glyph in the Maya, I know the name of it, how it's pronounced, and it actually matches to some extent the Hebrew, some of the Hebrew. So anyway, so there's been some obviously back and forth here, which you expect. Any language that sits anywhere gets some alteration to it. And they're also using the Mesoamerican, some of the sacred numbers in the number system. So
Yeah. When Mormon says they altered it themselves, right? In the
yeah,
text.
because it's
Yeah.
a base 20, so it has a little different setup than a base 10. Again, to any of your weird nerdy types out there.
The math types. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Again, kind of showed that already. Just to kind of a background, calendars in Mesoamerica. There's the long count calendar. I'm not really seeing any of that. There's different calendars in Mesoamerica. We actually have different calendars. Most people don't realize we're operating off 3 calendars when we're looking at
The
a
mixture.
date.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So you have your solar year. You have basically fossilized lunar calendar, which is the months. And sometimes they do dates in the lunar calendar, still modified. Easter, for example, is based on lunar stuff. And then we have a religious calendar, which doesn't match any of them, that we run concurrently. That's the weeks. Because the weeks, they're on our
7
calendar.
days. Yeah.
But they aren't.
never move.
Nobody does a leap week. They don't care about trying to adjust it. So there are multiple calendars in Mesoamerica too. So, and they actually changed it says that they changed the calendar 9 years after the birth of Christ. So we know that they have different calendars they're running. They still ran them all, but they were just picking the primary one. As far as initial series is a calendrical notation I should have probably had some examples of it, but basically it's just telling you that there's a date. Um, it's marking a date in these monumental stelae, and um, there's a supplemental series of glyphs that they use in there as date indicators. But this is not, I don't find this in the characters document anyway. Um, so we do see an initial series, which is really a calendar identifier in the characters document. So it's telling you which calendar it is. As you know, in the Book of Mormon, there are different calendars, right? There's reign of judges. They count by the reign of judges. They start
Lehi left
over.
Jerusalem. Yeah.
Yeah, the reign of judges is after they, the first year of the reign of judges, second year of the reign of judges. Then you have the Lehi departure calendar, right? They're counting years from Lehi's departure. You have the coming of Christ calendar is what I call it. So you start when Christ was born, then they start counting years. So does that make sense what I'm saying? So
Right. Yes. Yes.
yeah. So it tells you the calendar. So the supplemental series, forget about it, but we're looking to talk about initial series. Distance numbers are intervals between the dates in the Maya inscriptions. And they're usually the number is marked by a glyph. It's telling you there's a distance number. So you have a distance number glyph. And then you have posterior and anterior data indicators. These tell you which direction you count. So typically you'd have a distance number, and then, then you can count forward or backwards off that base number. And the glyphs tell you which you're counting 20 years in the past or 20 years in the future. Okay. And these are the ones that people have translated as it came to pass, and not LDS people, Mayanists have also called it that. And when I did the translation, I did not put it came to pass or the came to pass. I'm not trying to recreate King James Bible Hebrew. I just had since. I put a couple in so people could see what it was, but they could have been translated that way. So, anyway, and a simplistic way to think about it is Ronald Reagan was president in 1982. Then it came to pass after 4 years he was reelected. So you have a 1982 date, then you would have anterior
posterior glyph.
Glyph. Yeah.
You would say after this, it's 4 more.
Yeah. And so it came to pass, and then the distance number would be 4 years. So it's telling you initial date and initial series date, and then they're doing a distance number date, and then they're going forward and backward off of that. So it's a little bit convoluted. And I don't know the Book of Mormon's exactly doing that with every came to pass glyph. There are probably some other permutations, but we don't have those, so I can't really. Again, if I had the plates, it'd be great.
It'd be handy.
I give you a lot better presentation. So one of the key things is that the characters document, as I kind of state, I'm not saying that it is it actually matches everything in the Maya date counts, but the things that we do have do track that way. So like I said, you don't have certain series that aren't represented in the characters document, but there are where we do have it in the Maya. It's following the rules pretty much that I can tell of the Maya date count system. And then here I just talk about again that they're all sacred numbers. That's something that actually in the Maya is very. I mean, they actually do their divinatory text they have, and I kind of explain that in the book, where I actually show that I can see the underlying structure in the fourth Nephi. If you lay out all those dates, they're weird dates. And when 51st to 59th, nothing happens. He's creating intervals of the sacred numbers, which is what they did in the Maya codexes as well, divinatory codexes. So, and you can see that actually through all of the abridgment that Mormon did. And actually even Ether, what Moroni did, it was always curious, why are they telling us the length of reign of this guy, the age of this guy? It's not consistent. Why are they only doing it for some people? Actually, you can see it. They're actually doing it because they're all multiples have multiples from sacred numbers or summons. So anyway.
And is that because, like, for example, with Moroni doing that in the Book of Ether, it's not because he's trying to line up those kings with sacred events, like you were saying, being born at a certain sacred year, but is that because the characters they're writing with are those increments?
No, I think what happened, but I think what's happening is he's just picking and choosing in his abridgment those numbers that actually jive with sacred number calculations.
Okay.
I mean, does that make
Just
sense to
because
me?
just because he likes just because they like the numbers.
Yeah, and some of them, like Emer, the Son of Righteousness, has all these 19s, which is indicated of
Okay.
Christ. Yeah, there's stuff
Okay.
going on. I don't know them all. I mean, I'm telling you, I
Sure.
just
Right. Right.
these are just like
You've just
okay,
noticed that this and this add together to make this number that shows up. And I was
yeah.
just curious if you had a theory on why. Yeah, I was thinking if there was like, oh, we have a character for 53 or whatever, and a character for 13, that was less characters than writing the addition and subtraction to get to a certain number.
In a weird way, I think no, I think maybe they actually were longer. That
Hmm.
actually that was not something that they necessarily were doing for compact. And honestly, it's like why do we even care what the length of reign of any of these guys is equal?
Some
Doesn't add
Jaredite king that
anything to the story. So
right.
yeah, and as you notice, some critics say, hey, if he was trying to conserve space, he wouldn't have said not just ether. Well, ether doesn't have a year count because they don't think they really had it in the Olmecs. So they're just using the calendar around the so essentially you have where he's mentioning the 23rd year, the 24th year, the 25th year are past. He's not saying anything happened in them. And so it's like people say, oh, if he was really trying to conserve space, why would he even put those years in? But what
Right.
he's doing there is he's making gaps in sequences that match the sacred numbers. I kind of show that in the book.
Okay.
And so that's why he's including them. And so that's why I'm saying it was important to them. I think your divinatory, that was a sign of a divinatory codex. You had sacred numbers and intervals and sequences.
Okay. So it's their way of indicating that this record is sacred because our numbers match this system.
Yeah. And the number
Okay.
system itself is religious, is a completely religious based system. And I've kind of showed that some of the numbers actually mean something else. Like you saw the plate rebus. So you have 9, it's written as a plate. So it's a sacred, meaning they're actually using it on certain sacred items that the number. And the Hebrews had, the temple is full of 10, 10, 10, 10, 10
Sevens,
cubits.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So it's not Mesoamerican necessarily. It's also Hebrew. So that's one area. I mean, they both were like number crazy in a certain way. Sacred number
So
crazy.
you're saying they're engineering nerds too,
Um,
because they
yeah,
love numbers.
yeah. They were maybe even like physics majors. I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll get into these are the introductory glyphs, and I kind of what I found is they also have numeric elements. This happens to be the Lehigh departure calendar introductory glyph. The glyph on the left there, basically you have 600 years, so you have the form 400 is kind of the lotus, and you kind of can see two of those. This is a little less than some. You've got three times 200. At 600, that's the length of time of the Lehigh departure calendar. If you notice, it's also like a little tree, Lehigh kind of thing.
Yeah. Tree of life.
Yeah, and then the other one, it's part of the introductory glyph, as far as I can tell. They may have had a supplemental glyph of this form, but it's actually a Hebrew means two, so it maybe is 2 months or something in the. It happens to be, only one place in the characters document because it's actually setting that it's showing you where you're going to hit your base date, which has to do with the death of King Benjamin. So here I show you the letter Wa, and this is right out of Palestinian hieratic, that second glyph. Okay. And again, these are ones that there's a little interpolation because these are constructed glyphs. So they weren't like, okay, you find this in Egyptian. They're actually got their own calendar. So they're constructing this introductory glyph, which identifies which calendar they're on. So
Okay.
You can kind of see this is an Epa-Olmec ISIG introductory glyph. You kind of see these little curly cues on the top. They don't know they don't have any idea what those are, but I've kind of projected that it looks like that has an Egyptian base.
Okay.
Yeah, even the base of it has some meaning in Egyptian, going back to the base date of the Maya calendar. The reign of the king's calendar, it's like, okay, you got a 50 and then a bar that could mean a 5. That 3 back that kind of slanted 3 is a 50, which you would have seen in my other presentation
Hmm.
showing that that's really pretty straightforward. So why would it be 55? Well, that's actually the date that the calendar was implemented, was the reign of the judges. I mean, the king, excuse me. So as you notice, that's when Nephi became king. Um, so
Because Jacob 1:1 says it's 55 years since
right, and then you
Lehi
have
left
Jacob
Jerusalem.
1:9. He was
All
anointed.
right. So
Yeah,
he's
so it's
anointed king. So it's 55, not because the glyph is a construction that adds up to 55
yeah,
necessarily.
but that's what they're using, is that's an indicator. If they're doing dates in that calendar, they use that as an indicator, so you know which calendar you're on.
Okay.
And like I said, they're using again the numbers even to construct the calendrical markers because of the sacredness of them. So, um, and it's also a reverse glyph of the name of Nephi, not. That's another thing, is we know there are different glyphs for Nephi, probably his own name, because there was never a first, second, and third and fourth Nephi in the original text of the Book of Mormon, original manuscript. It was just Book of Nephi, Book of Nephi, Book of Nephi, Book of Nephi. So like, well, how can those all be the same books? Well, they're not. They were probably designated with a different glyph form. So still pronounced the same, but they were using a different underlying glyph form. Just like my name, Jerry, you can spell it Jerry or Geri. So does that make sense?
Yeah. Huh?
Yeah. So that 3 is actually a name for Nephi, as you find later. One of the other Nephis said that as a glyph form too. So this is a 7 tribes glyph, calendar glyph, which that's actually something new. So we don't have it because it's in the 160. It'd be the time period in the 116 pages.
Sure.
Um,
We do have the 7 tribes kind of named in the Book of Mormon,
exactly,
but yeah,
but not as a
but not as a
calendrical.
time.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I kind of think, I kind of know when that was and started, and looks like, it was somewhere pre-Mosiah. But the glyph form, that little cross, that is actually, as you see, that's straight from Egyptian. I didn't do it here, where I gave you the D and the Mueller numbers, but that's right out of Egyptian. So it means file or tribe or troop.
Okay.
And as you notice, the
Or
7.
we call it ites, right? Book of Mormon
Yep.
is ites. Yeah.
Right. So, but it's kind of like, I mean, I kind of discuss here, and I'm not going to read it all, but it's like, okay, 7 tribes, that would include the Lamanite tribes as well. Why are they doing it? And maybe it's because I don't really know exactly. That was partly when I translated. I wasn't like trying to like get, if it translated that way, I translated it
Sure. Yeah.
that
You
way.
weren't trying to force a meaning on
Yeah,
it. It's just
exactly.
whatever it was. Yeah.
So people can do with it what they want. People, like, well, I don't know. I mean, I'm postulating, but it
Sure.
is a calendrical period that's mentioned. So
Is the character next to the tribal character that looks like a 2? Is that a 7? Indicates
yep, that's
7?
yep.
Okay.
Yeah, and I showed that in a prior
Sure.
presentation and earlier part of the book, and there's actually a form of that in hieratic. So that's a little bit of a modified a little bit. So, but it's pretty clear that's what it is. So. The reign of the judges, again, it's a modified 7, just a
Hmm.
single. They had different forms of 7, and it doesn't say that. We don't know that there were 7 judges ever, but it doesn't say how many, but that makes sense, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And probably I'm guessing that maybe the Nephite tribe of Nephi was the chief judge, because they
So
also.
one judge per tribe, kind of a thing, I guess.
Mhm.
Although
Yeah.
I don't know how much the Lamanites were wanting the Nephite judges to judge them, but
Well, and that's the thing. It's like when it says Lamanites, well, sometimes it's like Mosiah left. He said anybody that would come with him, right?
right.
And so there may have been some, and then there were converted Lamanites. So I don't, that's the thing. I do think they were present. They weren't always, and it's a lot confusing because we don't have the underlying glyph forms. Because Nephi, really, in my opinion, there's a glyph form basically means Christians, right? It's an upside down cross. It's a cross flipped. So when they're talking about Nephi, it's like Amulek. It says, you know, Alma comes in there and he goes, "Well, I'm a Nephite." Well, it's like, well, he's in a Nephite city. Why would he even say that? But he's
Yeah.
telling him he's a Christian. So it's actually a religious group the word Nephite actually has different meanings. People of Nephi, so we don't really have all that figured out. Then we don't see all of that necessarily figured out, meaning because we don't have the underlying glyph forms. So that would probably
Sure.
tell us that, but we don't have it. And so what I'm saying, we kind of know there's something going on there just from the text.
Right.
It obviously has a different meaning depending on what's going on. Okay. And then the coming of Christ calendar, I kind of show in the Egyptian, it does match for, it can mean many or million, but joy, jubilation. It also, I don't really mention this, but it kind of has the form of a snake wrapped around a post.
Hmm.
Um,
The
so
serpent staff symbol. Cool.
okay, you got it. I just said a snake around a pole. I didn't. Again, but you would expect it's Christ. It's a religious calendar.
Sure. Yeah.
They're
Mentioned
constructing it. They're
specifically.
still using
Yeah.
the Egyptian concept, but they're fiddling
Mhm.
with it to.
Mhm.
Does that make sense to
Yeah,
make
of
a
course.
graphic
Yeah.
form that matches it?
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of the idea. I mean, I have a very tiny. Isn't a little bit. You speak Chinese. Isn't that kind of like Chinese characters are kind of a picture of what the word is in some
Yeah,
parts of it?
right.
It's
Exactly.
like this looks kind of like a mountain. It looks kind of like a house.
Yep.
But then it
Exactly.
has these other things on it. Yeah.
Yeah, and see what they're doing here though is they got an Egyptian glyph that obviously is not the.
It's more. It's different. It's more complicated.
Yeah, it's not the
in a
brazen
different way,
serpent. It's not the serpent on a pole, but they're modifying a little bit to make it match. So it's actually has the meaning of infinity, eternity, joy, all these great jubilation of Christ, and then but they get the original one that has the Egyptian meaning, but they're fiddling with it to make it look like Christ, right?
That's great. I like that.
Yeah, which I mean that's what I'm saying. They're the people writing an informed Egyptian, in my opinion, it wasn't a lingua franca per se. I think it was the very religious priestly class that was mostly writing and fiddling with it. So, and that's what's
Yeah.
happening. That's Maya's the same. They're artistic. They do all kinds of funky things with their glyphs to. Then we have and these introductory glyphs, I don't find them in the Maya like that because the Maya weren't using the Nephite calendar, meaning they weren't caring about the coming of Christ calendar or something, right? So you find the concept of the ISIG, but not an actual perfect match. Although the Epi-Olmec had a little bit, at least in form. So now we're getting into now we're getting into ones where I'm seeing some Maya correlation. And so these are all the glyph forms in the characters document, the cut and paste of this distance number glyph, because there are multiples of it. It's got that little funky 6,
Yeah.
but it's a little different. It moves around a little bit. So I actually explained that actually you can also tell by that which calendar period you're in.
Okay.
By
which side the 6 is.
Yeah, upside down. Yeah. And so I kind of figured that out later in my second book because I mapped it all out. I says, oh, these ones are, I mean, again, it's not based on a lot of data, but like 2 of them are the same and they're actually in the same calendrical period. That kind of tells me something.
Yeah.
And then also it was typical in Maya and even Egyptian to flip. They were doing all kinds of like having them face different ways and they were doing mirroring, funky things to just kind of do cool. I call it glyphnastics, where they're just fiddling a lot with the glyph. And Chinese did it to some extent too, but not to this level. But
to change the meaning or just to make it more interesting.
Sometimes it would have a little meaning change, but often it's just to make it, if they're
More
telling a
fun.
story, yeah, more
Gymnastics.
fun. Yeah, maybe it's part of it is I don't really know. I mean, I know they're doing it. It's like maybe it has some meaning I'm not seeing. I don't know. That's kind of what I'm saying. It was just fascinating because I'm like, as I figured some stuff out, but I'm like, I by no means have figured out everything.
Sure. Yeah.
It's just like I didn't know. I mean, it was the nights of brightness, 2 days of brightness for when Christ was born. It had like 2 little snaky things, and that did mean brightness, in 2 of them. But then when I tried to figure out I did a book on the geology of the Book of Mormon, included the destruction, explained that geologically. I also, in this chronology book, I wanted to try to explain the night of brightness, what happened there. And basically what happened is it looked like a coronal mass emission that shoves the northern lights all the way down to Mesoamerica. It happened in the 1800s. and there are a bunch of green snakes in the sky. So I think that glyph actually matches what they saw.
Yeah, and not necessarily trying to do the serpent without the staff.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm saying that was a different glyph, but it actually matched. It wasn't the. It was the.
What
It
was in
was
the
the.
sky?
Yeah, they said the two. It had the night of brightness. The way the glyph form they used actually matched what they were seeing. The signs and wonders.
Hmm.
So yeah. So I'm just saying there's lots of stuff, and actually, like in the darkness, like Samuel the Lamanite prophesied of the darkness. The number they use is like the upside down V, and instead of like a dot for the 11, they use like a little hanging thing, which in Egyptian means basically evil darkness, and looks like a little volcano. So, so there's actually stuff going on with the glyph forms. So here you see the shape of the form of that, kind of this weird H. Now here's the for the distance number. If you go to the distance numbers in Maya, and I've given examples from the codexes, from the monumental, and some of these are, it's not, it's a full sentence or something. It's telling a full date. So I'm just showing you that this is right off of the Maya stele or something. Doesn't mean that all these glyphs here, that's not necessarily a distance number on its own. It may have three, it may have numbers associated with it, but you see in the distance number glyph this little 8. So this is the single glyph, but they also use it in tandem. Like I said, you can see they smush stuff together and fiddled around and put different, 4 glyphs together. But so I call it an infix. Really, it's more of an infix. That and so you see all the different examples, and then you also have the little 6 showing up there that is affiliated as a stylized form. So I'm actually seeing that glyph form, and again, so it's I'm not. You can see it; it's actually there.
Yeah.
And so then I'm looking at, okay, people have tried to say what is the meaning of this distance number exactly in terms of, so it's succession, exchange. The little curly 6 is a ordinalizer or also succession. So they're kind of giving a name to it, a meaning of that glyph. It's a calendrical marker, collateral indicator, but they're also finding a meaning to it in some forms. And then in Egyptian, this is the Egyptian here, means to increase. The actual means also another. So you're actually, the Egyptian form is the same meaning as in the Maya too, meaning the word form of it. Does that make sense? So it's operating as a calendrical marker, but it's coming into the Maya in the same word, same meaning. So, and then, then you see the, you kind of see it even better in the demotic, that little H bar, which means another in demotic. So that's actually a really good match to the glyph, right? That you're seeing in the characters document.
Right. The H glyph in the characters document. Yeah.
Right. So it's got the little, so actually I'm saying, okay, so we can see it in the Egyptian. We can see it with the meaning in Egyptian. We can see it in the Maya. We can see the meaning in the Maya is similar to the Egyptian. And it's doing the same thing as a calendrical function. So, I mean, there's nothing.
Those are all lining up. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm not making any, I'm saying these are all pretty what you would expect if something got borrowed into a language.
Yeah.
These features. You also see it to the north, this form in Teotihuacan. So it's not just unique to the Maya, this kind of H. With Teotihuacan, nobody's really translated those glyphs very well. We don't know a few of them and some guessing. So we don't really have a lot of examples of the Teotihuacan. Like the Maya was on all their stele and they did a lot of language. And Teotihuacan, you don't see too many. There's like a plaza that has 50 glyphs in it, different things like that. But I'm saying it's actually, I think it's more, because Teotihuacan, that would be north of your Nephite Isthmus area. So, and actually Mormon says some of them went up there, right? Became part of that and the ways of extreme land northward. And the Teotihuacan kind of matches Gadianton, honestly, from cultural standpoint and time frame. So anyway, I'm just showing that it actually has other occurrences in Mesoamerica with similar kind of um, what they would think forms and meanings. So then let's go to the posterior date indicator glyphs. Here, these are all the examples in the characters document. Um, again, it's an infix, slightly modified, but it's an infix in the myoglyphs, the PDI myoglyphs. Here you can kind of see it's this bar with the two lines through it. I mean, so you kind of have it as an infix here. Down here, these are smaller, but same. So you're seeing it in all of their glyphs. So it's integrated into that glyph. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's an element among the other elements.
Yeah. It does has its own form too, but it's like it's kind of an affix, or it's kind of an infix in the affix. I guess what I'm saying is this whole thing, well, I couldn't say that completely matches, as an entire glyph, but if you look at the interior part of the glyph here, then you are seeing the characters document glyph.
Yeah.
So I'm calling it an infix in a Maya glyph, which they did. Maya did that. Some they don't know the meaning of, but they would smash something in that had a meaning into the inside of a glyph. And as far as the meaning, this is kind of a lot of material here, but I'm kind of showing that that they've translated it, and that you do see it in the hieratic in certain forms. It's not a perfect match, but actually I kind of show that the pronunciation in Egyptian, phonetically, it does kind of match what you find in the Maya. So there does seem to be a phonetic element that got incorporated into the Maya from that Hebrew, and it's kind of the Hebrew pronunciation of the glyph, or the Hebrew meaning. So it's actually like an Egyptian meaning, a Hebrew word that has that meaning, and then the Hebrew is getting put into the Maya. So kind of what I'm saying is you actually, which is what you see in the names, where you actually have a Hebrew name, but it's written in Egyptian glyphs. I don't know.
But the pronunciation would be a Hebrew pronunciation.
Yeah. So I'm not saying necessarily the Egyptian word for that glyph is going into the Maya. It's the Hebrew word for the same meaning. If you translate that Egyptian into Hebrew and then put it in, then you see the phonetic transfer in. And that's kind of what Brian Stubbs is seeing, is showing that there's a lot of Hebrew. There's some Egyptian, but a lot of Hebrew. So if you're writing a Reformed Egyptian, some of them you're going to be saying in Hebrew.
Okay.
Really. I mean, there may be some Egyptian, but mostly Hebrew. So, which, it's kind of a new thing. Most people think, oh, the Reformed Egyptian is just Hebrew. They're writing it phonetically Hebrew. They're using Egyptian phonetics. I'm like, that's wrong. Number one, you wouldn't do that. It's not shorter. It's actually longer. So,
right.
But that's what everybody's been saying. Shorter. That's why I caught a lot of backlash, from some people saying you're wrong. Well, I'm like, I'm just translating the damn thing, So I'm not trying to tell you that your research is all totally wrong for the past 30 years, but it is. So that's just the way it goes.
Well, there's the evidence to show it, right? It's not just about saying it. It's like here's the proof in the pudding is here it is right here.
Yeah, I mean their theory is because hey, you have all this Hebrewisms and Hebrew stuff in the Book of Mormon, right? Chiasm,
with the chiasm,
yeah. So they think it must be written with this Hebrew, whatever. And I'm saying, well, it's Egyptian writing. I mean, it probably had Hebrew, they would use that word and knew the Hebrew pronunciation of the Egyptian term. But of course, I have a different theory. I think a lot of the Hebrewisms, not the chiasms per se, but some of them are just translator deference to the King James Bible and Hebrew. They may not have completely read that way on the plates. There may not have been some Hebrew structure to that sentence. It's just the way.
You mean thee and thou wasn't written on the plates? What?
Yeah.
So, yeah, definitely a translation, right? Is
or even some of the the ands before and all that. It's like, yes, and I'm not saying that they didn't have that in their spoken language, but it may not have been in Reformed Egyptian. So I'm just saying the translation, and I'm kind of, as you see, I'm kind of showing even the number system. Well, obviously the meanings didn't make it through,
right?
Of some things, there's some cultural elements, and the Book of Mormon doesn't have it's not taking a lot of the original culture through. It's not taking the phonetics through. These names are not. The names themselves are either being put into a biblical Hebrew form, Egyptian form, or what I call constructed Sumerian for the Jaredite names. So they're actually created. These names are not, because you wouldn't expect Nephi to be pronounced the same way after 1,000 years. Languages shift. Even names have different, phonetics. So, and there was multiple languages. Obviously, it said it spoke the languages of the Nephites, and Enos had to learn the language of his father. Well, the lingua franca wasn't it. That's why he had to study it. And so, I'm just saying that I would not expect that everything makes it through the translation.
Sure.
Okay, so here are your anterior date indicators, these two little crescents. And then if you go to the Maya, it's actually, these are pretty straightforward. So you kind of see the two little crescents.
Yeah.
They put them on the side of things, the little fish. It's actually Mulek, interestingly enough,
Oh, yeah.
the day name for Mulek. So anyway, so these are out of the codexes, because the codexes are a little different than what they carved on the stone, right? So because in the same way the Book of Mormon, I mean, engraving something's different than writing it with a papyrus brush. So that was the other
Right.
thing. And looking at the hieratic, I'm like, okay, these are written in papyri, most of these, and then I'm trying to take the form that they engraved, which they may have
Would have
not
been a
been so
lot
fancy.
harder.
They may have not been
Yeah.
so fancy with it, right? And anyway,
Fix and fins get harder to do when you're engraving in stone or on metal or whatever. With papyrus brush, you get those thin strokes and flourishes.
yeah,
And
I mean
things.
and these they engrave. I mean, I have to give them my credit. They engrave super. I mean, they were art form. They were artists. They weren't really scribes. Let's be honest. They were artists, and so that's why they were so creative with all their stuff. Kind of that artistic mind, Engineer.
Yeah.
They weren't engineers, because engineers would just wrote it the same way every time. Okay, and then it's like, okay, I've got this. Now, where do I get it in Egyptian? It's like I didn't really find it super straightforward, but actually you can see what's happening with it. This is the Gardner form, this L1. It's a scarab beetle. And in the Maya, the word for the indicator is to happen, to exist, to change, come to pass again. The hieratic here, meaning it almost has exact same meaning in Egyptian as Maya, pretty much. Because Budge listed it as it came to pass, actually, as the Mayanists have done. But the form, you can see it's a little bit different. But that's why I think you're seeing it on the sides of stuff and all over, is they've kind of just taken the crescents off of this hieratic form. And I don't know if that makes sense what I'm saying there.
So let me see if I'm getting it. So starts as the scarab. The legs of the scarab are kind of crescent shaped.
Well, I'm saying that's the scarab. The picture of the scarab is the Gardner number. That's the monumental Egyptian.
Right.
These other ones, these other two down here are the hieratic.
Right. When I'm saying they look like the scarab, but an abbreviated version of the scarab. But I'm saying then it's like you go even more abbreviated and you just got the legs, which are those crescents.
Right. Yeah. And you got to remember, so they're trying to do things. They didn't have these ADIs in Hebrew or PDI. I mean, they didn't use those as far as we know, in any Hebrew date system. So they're taking the meaning, they're taking a glyph that has the meaning, and then the Maya are only taking a portion of it. Not a portion. The Reformed Egyptian is only taking a portion of the hieratic in doing what it's doing for the ADI for whatever reason. They just did the two.
Sure.
Probably because it's a short form, easier to write. And then the Maya are then taking that and incorporating that also. That's not an infix. That's a direct. Those two little crescents are direct ADIs.
Okay.
Does that make sense what I'm saying? So that,
yeah. So when you say they're not an infix, they're not building them into the inside of another glyph. They're their own glyph. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the actual glyphs.
Yeah.
Then there's a variant ADI in the characters documents, this little snake form, and you actually see that also in the Maya. There's a little snake on the side of the glyph. You can see that.
Right. And is that the one you were saying, that sign of the 2 days of or
No,
the
no,
dark
the 2 days
brightness?
isn't a calendrical marker. It is actually the word for brightness. And then
Brightness.
but they
Okay.
use they use that form because there's 2 days of brightness. So they're actually making like the glyph form say a bunch of things in a very simple way. And then it also is a shape of the signs and wonders itself. So it's very creative, even though they're two little
Yeah.
snake
The
things. It's like
artists.
once you know what it's saying, you're like, oh, it's kind of they're very smart. They're geniuses. They're who are are creating this language. I mean,
Yeah.
and I think that's also why Mormon says, "I don't know if I can communicate everything." Right? He was
Right.
and it's the placing that's interesting because in the number system, the dot changes if you multiply it by 100 if the dot's above and everything. So where it sits actually makes a difference to the meaning.
Changes the number. Yeah.
Yeah, and so anyway, so you can kind of see that and where it came from Egyptian, not quite so direct in terms of um, the meaning, but there is a phonetic connection um, there, which I kind of go into. And then the period ending glyphs, we have, this is a little trickier because I think the format they're using, they're attaching a period ending often with a line to the calendrical marker for that calendar when they're ending a period in the Reformed Egyptian, which the Maya didn't do that. But you can still see what they have it there, but they didn't work tying it to the same glyph. But so you have this little crescent, means behold in Demotic. Um, you also, like I say, you have this here. You've got this. It's kind of talking about the 7 tribes, any of the 7 tribes. So you kind of have a calendrical tie here with a dot. Um, and you have these transitional glyphs. So I'm not sure I completely understand this, to be honest with you, how they're designating it. I know it's the period ending, but I don't know
Right.
the orthography exactly what all the may have different meaning, Um, again, I don't like I say I don't know everything, but
The fact that you can strip these out and recognize these little arcs within a
yeah,
glyph combined with another glyph is incredible. I mean, and a very you're a very humble guy, man. It's incredible. It's awesome that you could put these things together. And obviously, when somebody figures something out and then tells you, you go, "Oh yeah, I can see that," but nobody else saw it.
yeah. And so this is another period ending glyph for the coming of Christ, right? You see the
Right, the
coming of
Christ
Christ.
glyph. Yeah,
Yeah, and so it's period ending associated with um, the reign of Judges period ending, and that ends into the um, coming of Christ. Now that part of it is like that; those calendars overlap. I know that now from the characters document. So they're actually still counting the reign of Judges. The date of the destruction is given in the reign of Judges in the characters document. It's the
yeah,
125th year, where we know in the Book of Mormon they're counting the primary coming of Christ. So so the calendars are overlapping. That's why I'm saying I don't really know if I know exactly what they're doing here. Meaning, I know it's the end of the reign of Judges. I know it's going into the coming of Christ. Maybe that's signifying something about an overlap. I don't know. So,
yeah.
they may have some calendrical things that they're. And here you see the period ending. So you have kind of this little behold with some dots. The little curvature here is showing that it's the end. That's the reign of Judges, and it's going over there to the spacer line, which these mean Most High and coming of Christ. So they're adding the Most High. They're adding things to Christ calendrical marker. Interestingly enough. So anyway, so you do see similar form for the period ending. Um, the little line and dots. This isn't like the best example, best match in the Maya, but again, they're doing different. They have period endings, but I would not expect them to match the way that the Nephite calendar is doing its endings. So now here's kind of where I show that kind of how that works together. You have 19 regnal years, then you have the ISIG, the reign of the kings. Then there's text about Mulix, and then there's an ADI. and what I'm kind of showing here is this is how I figured out the distance numbers, probably that little, the position of it. Oops. And I also do it in the other portion I don't have here, the second page, but it's kind of showing you how the date count works a little bit, how you
How
figure
you
out where
put
the
it
dates go.
together.
Yeah. And the one thing about all these dates is if you integrate them into our known Book of Mormon dates, they match exactly.
Yeah, yeah, that's
I
the
mean,
part
some are
that's
dates we don't have, but it still
right.
matches where you would expect, Mosiah's birth date or something like
Yeah.
that.
Which had to be
Anyway,
nice when you first came to the number after calculating it all up and then opening your Book of Mormon or whatever your chart with the dates on it and going, bingo.
yeah. And sometimes it was a little surprising. Like it had like the Lemhite expedition was gone for like close to 5 years. Well, it was 5 years before they got back with the Nephites, all the people of Lemhi. But so that was a 5 year period. You don't see that, and people are saying, "Oh, that's not the case." But I said, if you look closely at the text, for all the wars and they had a famine, it requires multiple growing seasons. So actually, it's kind of illuminated things from the text that people hadn't noticed.
Yeah. So you're saying the window of 5 years is when in Limhi's record when Alma leaves and Limhi's people
No,
are under
it's when
bondage to the
it
Lamanites.
has it talks about this is in the it talks about the Lemhite expedition leaving,
Oh,
uh,
to go find the Jaredites.
bringing the plates back,
Okay, okay,
and
that
then
expedition. Okay,
yeah, and it says in there 5 years, and then they were translated, so they came back. So meaning it just
they
said
were
they've
looking
gone
for the
many days.
Jaredites. Yeah, for 5 years. That's a lot more than many days.
Yeah, right. But it may include the time period when they actually arrived back with the Lemhites, and then the Lemhites went to Zarahemla.
Escape. Okay,
Right. Yeah. But it's still, so it's like three, it could be as long as 5 if they left really quickly after they arrived. They didn't leave too much longer, it looks like, after they arrived. So anyway, just one of those things. It's like, well, that's what the translation said. And then people argued. And then I looked at the text. I says, oh, actually, if you look at the text closely, it indicates that there was a longer period of time. They weren't just gone like
sure.
2 months.
Right.
Yeah. And so they were,
Fascinating.
yeah. And it actually kind of, when it says that they got the plates from a remnant of the Jaredites. If you read that closely, they didn't find this stuff out on a battlefield. They weren't picking up the swords and all that. That's what people think. It's like, well, that just because it says the copper was shiny and the swords were all cankered. So they're not even from the same time period. And it was really a sacred bundle, is what it was, because each tribe had a sacred bundle. And I kind of propose those are the swords of Shul. They were kept because they were this mythological swords made out of this volcanic mountain of Ephraim, because Ephraim means throw lots up into the air and stuff flying out of a mountain. So anyway, yeah,
Wow,
yeah. So
that's cool.
anyway, these are some of the other books. If you want to look them out, they're all on my website. You can download them. There's more than these, but there's this one here. This 780 pages, exciting reading.
Which is cool because I heard just part of some of your other presentations where you look at the Jaredite names and then you look back at Sumerian roots. And I know one you talked about was Akish, right?
Yeah, and I pretty much all the Jaredite names and even the metrological system, all the weight, the gold, silver, those are all basically out of the Sumerian proto-cuneiform system, Shia system, Shiams. Like Limnah, we know that's 7 measures of grain, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you go through the calculation and what the Book of Mormon says. And then Sumerian law is measure Imnah 7. So Limnah 7 measures
It's almost the same.
of grain. Yeah. So it matches
Yeah.
Shiblon like half. So I kind of show you that actually, and we know that because like one of the names is Kish, right? In the Book of Ether, Kish is a known city in Sumer. So it's not like this is rocket science for me to go back to Sumer.
Sure.
It's kind of obvious that that's where they came from. And then I also found a number that actually looks like it's a proto-cuneiform, the number 30 in the characters document, and 300. It means it's a new number. It comes from about 2500 BC, so I kind of can guess when they left, which matches pretty good what they left. And then you go through the generations, they had the big famine and everything, and there was a known worldwide dearth at that time. We know that from paleoclimatology. So there's a lot of stuff I work on that's like not related to this. It's just scientific stuff.
Sure. Well, geology and all that other stuff.
Yeah, and it all ties in. What
Yeah.
I'm saying, I've found nothing in the character document that isn't this. It's actually been eye opening that it adds gives me a little more information as I'm finding out that is there that dovetails with all my other research too. So that's another reason why I know it's probably correct for the most part.
Yeah. Were there
So,
any surprises that you came across as you were doing this or other parts of the Book of Mormon research, the Swords of Shul, where you went, wow?
oh, there's a lot of those. I mean, meaning
Well,
just I
just
just
like you,
work.
obviously, yeah, impressive things that you're like, wow. I mean, you already know Joseph Smith didn't make this up, but it's like,
Well, just
wow.
just today I was working on okay because I did Swords of Shul and you have Mulek. I did kind of showing Mulek has some correlation into the Olmec. Then I'm looking at the basically the Wanderer stele, which has the Phoenician guy and it's got a foot and it's got some other glyphs on it, which they haven't really translated. They're kind of worn off. But I was looking at it, it's like that's interesting because the one is like the turkey head, which means a foreign king. And then there's one that's lobed, and probably the only thing in Maya that matches that is ocean or sea. And then the little glyph, the round glyph, there's very few just perfectly round glyphs in the Maya, and that means Mulek. That's the day name for that is Mulek. They pronounce Mulek in the Maya. So something like that. That's kind of like, oh,
Wow.
that's cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, so I'm
That
just saying
is.
those are kind of things that as you're looking, it's like, oh, okay. That again, it's consistent with the Book of Mormon. Yeah, I don't know. Just everything I'm studying, I'm doing something also on the small plates. What happened to them? Why we don't see much of them talked about, and what happened to them, where they went. And so I think I figured that out, kind of um, looking at a lot of different things in the Book of Mormon itself. So
Wow. Well, this
yeah,
is awesome. I'm just in awe of all the work that it takes. Things that may seem obvious to you, and you're like, here it is. It wasn't obvious to other people. Other people weren't able to put it together, and I'm just grateful that you did basically have done all this for free. You've spent years of your life researching these things,
yeah, it
and
cost me
we
money actually.
yeah, that's true.
I pay
That's
for all
true.
the review, everything. I don't sell
Those,
them. So
yeah, the 3,000 people you asked to review your stuff or whatever you sent out.
yeah,
Uh,
that's free, but I actually do paid review where I pay a guy
yeah,
400, $500, and
sure.
yeah, some of them are interesting. They come back because I use non-LDS people where I can,
Yeah,
where
when
they're
they
willing to do.
cooperate
Yeah,
with you.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, so like there's one that it was a company that would just do peer review for you. You'd send it in, and then you pay the money, and then they find the reviewers, right?
Okay.
So
Okay.
on the Sumerian book, it was interesting because the guy came back. Obviously, he's a professor somewhere, not LDS of Sumerian, and he came back, and they are very sophisticated in their review, meaning these professional review where you're paying. So they go through and is your methodology correct? All these things. It's not nothing against like the interpreter, but you send something in there. It's like the comments I did once. The comments I got back were like, these people don't really understand what's going on here. It's not. It's not very. It's not. They do peer review, but it's not. They don't require them the level of. They may just read it superficially and make some comments. These guys, actually get into the details and say, and this guy went through. He says, your methodology, your use of Sumerian dictionaries, all that is correct. He says, it's obviously not, I'm showing that these are not necessarily Sumerian names, but they're constructed from Sumerian. He says, that's all interesting. But he basically said, he said, for this theory to be correct, he goes, that would mean the Book of Mormon must be true, which of course it cannot be.
Right.
So that was interesting.
Classic.